Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And yes, the title is correct. And yes, the footage you're watching in the background is correct. And this might surprise quite a few of you if you've been watching my channel for quite some time. So we are talking about the Tier 9 Techline Japanese battleship, the Izumo, today. And yes, the ship has aged tremendously well, with the help of a couple of major buffs. Now, let me walk you through my history with the Izumo. So rewind back to 2017 before I believe I even started to do the channel. The Izumo was my sticking point in the Japanese battleship line grind. It was hands down the worst Tier 9 battleship back in the day. It was spotted from the moon, even with all the concealment modules on it. It was absolutely just gobbled up by HE. It didn't have the best AA to start off with, and even when you upgraded the ship, the AA mounts were easily knocked out. And this is back in the day of RTS CVs. If you think the CVs today are bad, the RTS ones are much worse. You've clearly never been manually dropped by all squadrons from a midway if you think otherwise. And the guns were frustratingly inaccurate. She had poor Sigma and the Japanese battleship Dispersion on top of that, which meant that you were missing shots sometimes by pixels, sometimes by miles, and it was incredibly frustrating. And a stock Izumo is the most painful experience I've ever had in this game in terms of the performance of a ship. But that was in 2017. We're in 2021 now. And I recently decided to give this battleship another go, and wow, she has aged fantastically well, with the help of a few major buffs to the ship. And we're going to go through her stats now. I'm going to go over the buffs that were given to her as we go over that section of the stats, then talk about how she's been playing recently in the game. So starting off with her armor. So the armor layout of the Izumo is actually pretty good for her turret layout. Her turrets are all for the superstructure a la Nelson, although not completely a la Nelson. Turret number 3 is facing the wrong way if you're looking at it from, well, a gameplay point of view and a design point of view, kind of. Now, this was explained to me a couple of times as it's just the limitations of the Japanese technology during World War II. There's something about the machinery that limited them to having their turrets in this configuration. If you look at the cruisers, guns like the Atago and such, they're in the same configuration as well. But, you know, it would have been nice if turret number 3 was facing the right way forward, and also if turret number 2 could 360. But anyway, that beside the point. She has a massive 356mm armor belt, and when angled, that thing's going to bounce just about everything that you can throw at it. And you can get all 9 guns on target fairly easily in the Izumo if you're paying attention to your surroundings and making sure you're properly angled toward the ships that are shooting at you. And it works both bow in and stern in too. She actually has some pretty decent firing angles from the rear. Not the best, but you have enough angle back there to where you can keep that midsection of your ship angled toward the enemy team, and you'll be bouncing their shells all day. So that's very, very nice there. Now, one of the biggest buffs comes to her mid-deck. This massive middle deck right here was buffed up to 57mm. And that is just a giant middle finger to HE, and I love it. Now, back in the day, this was not the case. This could easily be pinned. I believe it was just 32 back in the day, so it could easily be pinned by ships with IFHE. That's not the case today. 57mm of just no screw you to HE. And of course, look at how massive this middle deck is. You can imagine how easy it was for cruisers back in the day, and even today, how easy it is to hit this section of the Izumo, but it's not easy to pin anymore because of that buff to that bit of armor right there, and I love it. Survivability, nothing here has really been changed. Her hit points are still 78,900 and a 28% torpedo damage reduction. Her guns now, she has 9 410mm 16-inch guns. Now, these guns have received a couple of buffs. First off, the Sigma was increased to 2.0, and then the pins were improved on the guns. So that right there is two, again, tremendous buffs for these guns. Now, keep in mind the stats I'm bringing off to you, they are with my build that I showed at the beginning of this video on this ship, so do keep that in mind. She has a 26.4 second reload time if you have the reload module. The turrets turn in 36.8 seconds. That's quite quick for Japanese battleship turrets. Maximum dispersion 223 meters. The HE has a 30% chance of causing a fire and 6,500 maximum HE shell damage, and it can pin 68 millimeters of armor. And the AP has a maximum shell damage of 12,900, and she has a firing range right now, again with the reload, not the range mod, of 21.7 kilometers. And her AP shells have a velocity of 870 meters a second. Her HE shells are a little bit slower at 869 meters a second. So, like I said, back in the day with her lower segment, I think she had 1.8 back in the day, or 1.7 was one of those. Combine that with the Japanese battleship dispersion, and it's quite frustrating. The Japanese battleships have this weird almost star pattern dispersion sometimes, and that's kind of to offset either their high number of guns or their highest sigma value, like when you get to the Yamato with her, again, very large caliber guns and very good sigma of 2.1. That's kind of to offset that. But the Izumo had 9 guns and they're only 16 inches at tier 9. Now, 16 inches at tier 9, it's not small by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of standard. And you only have 9. You don't have 10 like you did on the Amagi or on so many of the other lower to mid tier ships. And you don't have massive 18-inch guns that the armor system in games kind of designed around, So those things combined together led to some very, very aggravating salvos where you bounced or you missed again by a pixel or by a mile. That's how it felt playing the Izumo back in the day. But today, as you can see in the footage behind you, they are much more accurate and they pin a lot more too. So that's fantastic. Secondary, she has 24 of the 127mm guns, although not a secondary ship by any stretch of the imagination. This is more of just leaning into her AA. Again, it's got a lot of secondaries, and I tried a secondary build on it back in the day. I was desperate. And sure, you're shooting a lot of secondaries at the enemy ships, but by no stretch of the imagination a secondary ship. And with a sea hull, you have one 155mm gun in the rear. AA on the ship, not really that great. To my knowledge, they haven't really messed with the AA at all. It's the same situation where it was before. It doesn't have the best AA in the world. Now, the Sea Hull, it does have a lot of AA mounts, but they get just destroyed so easily with the amount of HE that normally gets thrown at this ship. Now, sure, with that mid-deck deck armor buff, you're not going to be eating as much HE, but it certainly is going to be knocking out the AA guns, of course, plenty easily. So, AA is not this ship's strong suit. Maneuverability with the speed flag on, you can get up to 29.4 knots. She has a 19-second rudder shift time, so not the most nimble boat. Now, Concealment, they did buff her Concealment now with the commander skill and with the module. You get it down to 13.5 kilometers. I believe before it was sitting somewhere around 15.7, which was garbage, absolute garbage. Back in the day and today, that's trash. So that's her stats, and as far as her consumables go, you get standard IGN heal, standard IGN damage con, and a fighter or a spotter. So today, what makes this ship so good today? Well, like we said already with regards to HE, that 57mm middle deck is just, again, a giant middle finger to HE. But also, now that deck can no longer be pinned, look at the superstructure on this thing. There's almost none. This has one of the smallest superstructures. I think I'll be pretty safe in saying the smallest superstructure out of any of the high-tier battleships. So that means that now that they can't pin that giant deck in the middle of the ship, they have to hit the superstructure if they want to pin. Or, of course, just land on the foredeck if they can pin 32. So since there's so little superstructure to hit with HE, they're just going to be missing shots a lot more. Or just shattering on your, again, 57mm deck. Now, this comes very, very, very much into play now playing against ships like the Italian battleships or the Italian cruisers now that have SAP. Italian battleships, so much so when they're fighting another battleship, they have to rely on hitting their superstructure and chunk them for like 20k. You guys have seen me do that in my Colombo and my Lepanto plenty enough, where you just shoot them in their superstructure and move 30k from the ship, where you can't do that in the Izumo because there's so little superstructure and your guns are so inaccurate that you're not going to really be doing much damage, and you'll see this happen later on in the match. So that little superstructure is protecting you against Just tremendous amounts of HE spam, and then on top of that, the SAP battleships and the SAP cruisers as well. So with also all those buffs to the guns are so much better now. So you have a ship now that's well protected from HE spam because they increased her deck armor. She has such a small superstructure. You have guns now that are much more accurate than it used to be with a 20-second reload time. 26-second reload time with the build that I'm running on the ship right now, with better pins than what it had in 2017, which is, oh my god, that's 4 years ago. I keep wanting to say 3 years ago. That's 4 years ago now. Dang. So you have a ship that's very well suited to the current meta, especially at high tier, where there's a ton of HE spam right now, and the engagement ranges are a bit further back. Now, of course, with a 21-kilometer range on the ship, you're not exactly sniping by any stretch of the imagination, but you can put the range mod on and get that out a little bit further, and with the accuracy of the guns, I feel you'd be pretty good for that too. Now, keep in mind too, they did decrease their concealment range. So now you have a 13.5 kilometer concealment range. So you can make that 21 kilometer range with a 26-second reload on the ship work a lot better now, because you can actually have a cushion to go undetected and run away from the fight if you need to, and reposition, and not just run away entirely. You got to reposition, help out your team. Don't be one of those battleship players. And then you have the belt armor now that you can actually work with now, since the ship's pretty darn good, and I'm just blown away by how much better the ship is from just a couple of tweaks. Now, they were pretty big tweaks, but it's not like they completely reworked the ship itself. All they did was buff that one plate of deck armor, and just adjust the guns a little bit, and now we have an absolutely fantastic Tier 9 Techline battleship that I'll probably be playing a lot more of now. And it's still a very weird ship in the line. If you look at the Japanese battleship line, you go from battle cruisers mostly in mid to higher tiers with the Japanese battleships, and then this weird thing here with the Izumo, and then you get to the Yamato, which is kind of like the pinnacle of the dreadnought style battleship design, and you have this weird barge looking thing in the middle that used to be quite terrible, but now is actually quite good. And I've been doing pretty darn good in it too. I've been getting around 130, 140,000 damage a game. Now, granted, this is, after playing the game for 4 freaking years, but even with the accuracy that the guns had back then, I wouldn't ever dream of being able to do that on a consistent basis with the Izumo. At best, you'd get maybe 100,000 damage a game. Maybe back in the day, especially when she was really terrible and really, really not doing too hot. Kind of like around the time the British battleships came out. That's when I think the ship was at its lowest point. But I'm so glad they tweaked this ship. They buffed it quite a bit. It used to be a joke that you had to gain enough honor to get the Yamato by just suffering through the Izumo. But now it's quite a good ship. I'd recommend you guys try it out if you haven't touched it. If you're like me and just parked the ship and didn't touch it after 3-4 years after you got past it, it's quite a good ship now. Is it the best Tier 9 battleship? I wouldn't go as far to say that, but it's a hell of a lot better than it used to be. It's kind of come back and redeemed itself after all that pain it's caused me. Is it my favorite Tier 9 battleship right now? No, of course not, but it's one that I'll be playing a lot more of and taking her out of port quite a lot more than I recently have. And I do think the first time that I took her out to record footage for this video was, I do believe, legitimately the first time I've played her in at least 2 to 3 years. I think I touched her once for the Japanese Battleship Guide video, just to get her in that cinematic that we do at the beginning of the video, but that's not taking her into battle or anything. But anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think about the Izumo in the comments down below, and what your experiences have been with her thus far. If you've played her a lot since they got her buffs out, which of course was, I think they buffed her like 2 years ago. I'm just really late to the party to check her out after that. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 30,000 subs, and we just passed 28,900 a few days ago, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're having a wonderful time and a wonderful day. I hope to catch you guys in the next one.